So, my grandparents took care of me my entire life. But now my parents are coming out of nowhere and trying to blackmail my grandparents. You guessed it, for money. They say you can choose your friends, but the choice of family is not up to you. A fact I wish was never true. If I had my way, I would rather not be born than to be referred to as the son of my parents, because besides the shame and ridicule which their callous and careless lifestyle brought, I could be linked to an orphan as they both cared little of my existence. The only warmth I experienced in my family came from my grandparents, Jose and Guadalupe. They were very rich folks that owned the largest cattle ranch in all of southern Mexico. But though they had all the money they could buy, my grandma found it difficult conceiving, and after so many years, they just had a son. My father, Santiago. Being people who were strict and disciplined about life, they tried but failed miserably in raising my father to uphold the same moral standards which they did. My father was by every standard immoral. He was found at every place where pleasure was present. Little wonder he was constantly absent at his father's ranch, except when he needed to coerce one of the maidens there to sleep with him. His fame for women, wealth, and worship preceded him wherever he went, and my mother Juanita, who happened to be a loose girl at the time, took advantage of the opportunity set before her by getting pregnant for my dad. She knew it was her passport to the wealth which her lover's parents had amassed. In a bit to avoid the shame that was evidently coming, my grandparents had their son marry a woman who was on her way to become a harlot, and that was how I came to be. The union of my parents was one devoid of love. It was a damage control technique employed by my grandparents to save the face of the family, and so whatever resulted from the union, I was neglected. Not even a son could help bring these two close, and so, while my mom continued to warm the bed of every man that had enough coin to fill her purse, my father did not recline on his womanizing and gambling. My parents lived on the ranch. Even though they would not work there or anywhere, my grandparents supplied their every need for the sake of their grandson who they loved. The lifestyle of my parents was somewhat hindered from growing worse due to the presence of my grandparents, and so they decided to move to the city. There was little my grandparents could do to hold them back, so they resolved to sending them monthly stipends that would take care of my needs. Stipends that was used to sponsor their pleasure. My grandparents finally just took custody of me when it dawned on them that I could end up threading the same path as my father, seeing that there was no one to lead me right. My parents were all too relieved to have their 6-year-old son move out of the house. For them, it was a good riddance to an unwanted rubbish. They now had the liberty to live their, quote, best lives, and they did just that. For a 6-year-old, I had picked up certain dirty habits which my grandparents observed. It was clear they had some work to do on me, and they sure did. They had watched their only child go off on a different path, a path their only grandchild was beginning to tread. Strict measures were put in place to put me in check, and, well, they did. I decided to turn a new leaf when my father had an accident from drunk driving. Watching his life hang on a thread at the hospital made me decide to not end up like him. I straightened up. My presence around the ranch was felt, and as I began helping around with almost everything, it soon got me endeared to my everyone, including my grandparents who were grateful I was preserving the family honor, and relieving them of certain duties in the ranch, thereby giving them more time to rest as they could not retire early since there was no one to manage the family business. The more I excelled in my studies and in the ranch, the more responsibilities my grandparents committed into my hands. I was working on the farm one hot sunny day when my grandparents sent for me. Getting home, I found both my parents seated in the lounge while their eyes observed the changes that's taken place since the past 5 years when they last visit. They put up an excited facade immediately that I got in. I knew it was an act. They had exhausted the money they got from their last visit, and this was just a ploy to con some cash out of my grandparents. I watched their mixed feelings of hurt, anger, and pain as my father, who resumed his life of debauchery immediately. He recovered from the accident and almost claimed his life. He came up with a story of wanting to start a carpentry workshop, so he needed to take me back with him to help out, so he didn't have the money to hire labor. Here was a man who hated work with a passion. He had never lifted a fork on the farm all his life, and now he wanted to be a carpenter? His words sounded stupid. They were stupid. My father knew that if he made them take me away, my grandparents would do all their powers to keep me back, and it always involved money. Grandpa could read his son from a mile away, and although he was not as stupid as my father, he decided to pay for a hired labor so that I would be left alone. It ended in favor of my parents, who left the ranch with 50,000 pesos, and a pledge from my grandpa to continually send the same amount every month till my father's, quote, business was stable enough to sustain the hired labor themselves. It hurt so much seeing the people who excitedly welcomed me as I walked in now take their leave without saying goodbye to their only son, whom they had not seen in years. I had to get past the fact that my parents only thought about me when they ran out of money. We never saw or heard from my parents for 3 years, and that was because Grandpa remained true to his words by constantly sending the 50,000 pesos he promised. My parents finally showed up 2 months after. I turned 18 to inform Grandpa that they did not receive the stipends for 2 months running. They spoke with the tone that was suggested of entitlement. My grandparents looked on in disgust as my parents demanded to know the reason behind their failure to live up to their word. Grandpa, who was not going to sit and soak in the trash they were pouring out, pointed to them the fact that a business that's been in existence for 3 years, if at all there even was one, should be able to take care of their expense of the workers. Grandpa emphatically stated that he was no longer going to let his hard-earned dime go onto an imaginary business. My parents were furious. They threatened to leave with me, but Grandpa would not give them their blackmail. He simply told them I was of legal age to make decisions for myself. Well, I chose to stay. Then there was nothing anyone could do about it. All eyes were on me as the ball rested in my court. My parents looked at me for the first time since they came in hopes that I would choose them over my grandparents. I was angry, not stupid. The words, "I hate you," left my mouth almost immediately. I ran into my room, shut the door behind, and burst into tears. The only thing my parents ever gave to me. My parents left with their tails between their legs without a dollar. They had to now devise some other means to survive, as nothing would be coming from my grandparents. They had lost their love of their child and respect of everyone else, but they cared less. I got into college 2 weeks later in the city where my parents lived. Grandpa made sure I lacked nothing, and I did my best to stay clear of distractions that presented itself, as girls, partyings, and the like. I was actually a novice when it came to the girl stuff, so it meant I had to be on my own. My parents got wind of my situation, and it seemed as though he had kept a close tab on me. I was very embarrassed when my father came looking for me in school, in my classroom. I was in college, and I'm yet to find the college students whose parents follow them around campus. Everyone wore a look of suppressed laughter as I stood outside with my father. It wasn't the place nor time for a chit-chat, and so when he asked that we go get coffee by the weekend, I readily accepted just to dismiss him. Weekend soon came. Here I was sitting face to face with my parents while thinking about what they were up to. To my surprise, they began apologizing for how they treated me in the past. I had to pinch myself to make sure it was not a dream, as I heard them profess their love for me. I fought really hard to keep the tears which had gathered around my eyes from falling, but I failed, and for the first time in my life, I was locked into the embrace of my parents. We were like one little happy family. We met frequently as my parents claimed they wanted to make up for lost time. Things seemed to fall in place, and I would have noticed my grandparents of the recent developments, but my parents claimed the time was not right yet, and I agreed as I was eager to please them. The only thing that mattered to me was the attention which my parents were giving me. Thanks to the father who taught and encouraged me to talk to ladies, I soon had a girlfriend called Isabella. She was a year younger than me and very pretty. I introduced her to my parents the next time we met, and my father was happy that I was becoming a man. The sweet relationship between my parents and I, turned sour all of a sudden as they began leeching my finances. My mother either caught a serious flu or needed treatment. Our father got robbed, needed financial support. They played the victim card, so I always offered financial assistance, which they would appear to decline at first, not wanting my grandparents to feel like they were taking advantage of me, but would suddenly accept it when I assured them that it would never get in the ears of my grandparents. They lived off me, but I did not mind. Isabella soon became very uncomfortable about the whole thing, but when she tried talking to me about it, I got angry at her. She was supposed to be happy for me and not paint my parents black. Which child would not take care of his parents, I thought to myself. The greedy nature of my parents grew worse with each passing day, as they steadily became demanding. The day I graduated from high school, I would forever remain fresh in my mind. My granny, Guadalupe, got me a car as a gift. I remember the look Isabella had on her face when a brand new BMW parked right in front of her and her friends, while the window rolled down to reveal her boyfriend behind the wheel. My parents wore a greater look of shock and surprise as I and Isabella came down from my car to meet up with them at the coffee shop. My parents were lost in thoughts while I talked about my grades and how well I've done. They were looking for a new way to keep on feeding off me. Now that I was done with school, the stipends which Grandpa gave me would no longer be coming in, and I would likely relocate back to the ranch to help them out, till my grandparents got me a job amongst one of the top firms owned by their friend who lived in the city. It meant that the influence they had over me would wane. They started changing the direction of our conversation towards childbearing and marriage. Isabella and I just felt uncomfortable. I just graduated at the age of 23. My girlfriend was 22 and we had no job. Marriage and childbearing was definitely off the table. I was not going to bring a child into this world when I was not ready to train him. I clearly told my parents that Isabella and I are still far too young and had lots of time in our hands, but before leaving that day, my father pulled me to the side and demanded that I get Isabella pregnant, make her my wife before the year ran out. While I was trying to figure out why he would be forcing me against my will, he said I was ignorantly seeding on a gold mine, and he was only trying to help me exploit it. I stood with a look of confusion written all over my face. It was at that moment he dropped the bomb. He knew how much grandparents desired children. They wanted to ensure the family preserved long after they were gone, so my father demanded that I use child Isabella would give birth to blackmail them into signing off their properties to me, otherwise they would never see their great-grandchildren. It was really disappointing that my dad would want me to betray his parents, and worse still was the fact that he threatened that he and my mother would disown me for life if I did not follow through with his plan. Well, I was depressed for a month as I realized that Isabella had been right all along. My parents only cared about themselves. They wanted me to blackmail my grandparents who would not want to disown the only reasonable seed their bloodline had. So they too would have to share in the loot. 3 months passed before I finally knew what to do. Isabella was the ideal woman for me. She helped me through the process and made me realize that family should always come first. We paid my grandparents a visit and I recounted everything before their ears. I apologized for keeping my parents and I a secret. I made them understand that I would not love them less even if I was left without an inheritance. Well, Grandpa Jose summoned my parents and I to the ranch 2 weeks later. In the presence of his lawyer, he notified us that he had willed 5% of his property to charity, 5% to my parents, and the remaining 90% to me, and it meant I was to take care of the reins of leadership at the ranch, while my grandparents took the back seat. and retired. While my parents were having hopes of feeding off the 90% handed to me, I made it very clear in the midst of everyone that I was disowning my parents, and I had already applied for a restraining order from the police that I would keep. They're gonna be far, far away from me. Family did come first. Grandpa Jose and Granny Guadalupe were the only family I knew. Well, I guess everyone received what they deserved at the end of the day. Well, it sucks OP had to suffer from depression, but luckily his girlfriend convinced him to tell the grandparents the entire plot of what the parents were up to. Guys, let me know your thoughts about this story. Drop them down below in the comment section. Maybe tell me what you would have done if you were in that situation, or if you've ever been in something similar to that. There's one more story on the video, and the title is, Am I the A-hole for not wanting to be part of my stepmother's family tradition with my step and half-sister? I hope you guys are having a great day. If you're not subscribed to the channel, take a second right now and check out all the channels we have to offer. You can find them in the description section below, and let's get right into story number 2. My stepmother has this tradition her family does regarding weddings where all the sisters wear the same piece from a family member's wedding outfit. Typically, it's something from your mother or grandmother's wedding. My stepmother and all her sisters wore their mother's veil. Stepmother's niece by her older sister all wore their mother's wedding pearls. You get the picture. Well, I'm engaged. My stepmother sat me, my stepsister, and half-sister down to discuss what our item would be. I told her I was planning to wear something of my mom's, and that would be all the extras I would go with. She told me it was an important tradition to continue. I told her, it's nice of her to think of me, but it wasn't my tradition. She then said the simple answer would be let them wear the necklace when their wedding days came around. They thought that was a great idea, and said if it was the piece they were thinking it was the most beautiful thing ever, and they'd love to wear it. I said that's not going to happen. That it was a piece of my mom and I could have during my wedding since I can't have her. My not wanting to do this tradition has caused some arguing. My step and half-sister were upset I would not do it with them. My stepmother is upset that I don't want to embrace a tradition from her side of the family. The tradition has no interest to me at all, and I would never share something of my mom's with my step or half-sister. My dad tried to talk me into it. He told me it would mean so much to him, and I would just like to finally feel that they're just my mom and sisters, instead of having step and half in front of their titles. I told him no, that I have a mom, and her being dead does not change that or mean I need to see someone else as my mom. My stepmother told me she was always trying to make sure that she was truly a part of her family, a true daughter. And I guess I'm an a-hole for rejecting that as an adult, when it doesn't just hurt her, but my sisters as well. Am I the a-hole for not wanting to do this or turning it down? So, a lot of people are thinking that this necklace might come up missing. One of the comments says, I wouldn't be surprised if the necklace somehow disappeared before the wedding. OP definitely needs to lock it up with her only having access to it. Guys, what would you do if you were in OP's position? Let me know in the comment section. That's going to wrap up today's video. I hope each and every one of you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one.